Hey, hi there everyone. We're live from TDOS 2016 here with Michelle LaRue. I'm going to just throw this all up for you guys real quick. So this right here is our Twitter handles, at Wildlife BioGal and at Dr. Michelle LaRue. And then if you don't quite catch all of this later, or all of the broadcasts later, you can go to wildlifebiogal.com, get the links to Periscope. I'll upload this to YouTube and also make a podcast out of it for SoundCloud later on. It might happen a couple days after the conference, because with how crazy busy everything is, having time to sit in front of my computer to upload it all isn't going to necessarily happen. So, but yeah, this is going to be our last Periscope from TWS, so pretty excited to have Michelle here. So we're going to talk about some of her academic history, all the amazing research she's done, some of the really cool SciComm she does. I mean, the cougar or not thing, I mean, heck, that's just amazing right there. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I started out in my first thing I ever did in academia or in wildlife research was looking at hoary bat guano. So I was digging through stomachs and intestines of dead hoary bats and making little slides out of what I found in there, so to look at their diet. And I was hooked ever since. So then I went and did some interning for the DNR in Minnesota, working on white-tailed deer, and then that kind of propelled me into doing research on mountain lions, which is where I went to grad school at Southern Illinois University, working with Dr. Clay Nielsen on habitat modeling and dispersal corridor modeling for mountain lions in the Midwest. And then after that, I had enough GIS experience and some other experiences, remote sensing experience, and then I got a job at the University of Minnesota, where I basically was hired to be a GIS person. Even though my background was in wildlife and things, but I knew enough GIS to be dangerous, so I made a lot of maps for the United States Antarctic Program. And it was through that experience that I became inspired to do my PhD. And so I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota starting in 2011, and I got done in 2014.
Great. So I just have to ask, because I've got a niece and nephew who are 9 and 6. Do you have any good bat poop stories that you can tell?
Bat poop stories?
Yeah.
That is the first time I've been asked about bat poop. I get asked about penguin poop all the time.
Well, I'll ask you about penguin poop. You've got some good stories for that.
Well, see, and this is the moral of my story so far in life, is everything comes back to guano, to poo. Everything comes back to poo. I started out doing hoary bat guano. A good bat. So actually, one of my favorite parts of doing this job, so I would work in the dark, because you'd have to look into a microscope and look and sort through the bat guano and find all of the things that were identifiable of the parts of the insects that they had eaten. And so it was really nice and dark in there, and it was the light of the microscope was really bright, and so every once in a while you'd be like scanning through and looking, and you'd end up with this like crazy like water beetle claw or something that was like really, really hairy, and those were always really fun. So that's really the only like fun thing that I would say was fun. It's like finding something that was just like big and hairy and like a claw.
Like it was something there.
It was great. Yeah. Otherwise, a lot of it was just a lot of like wings and things that were boring. So like chelicera and feet and things were always really fun.
But like any of that like big name stuff was always like, oh, there's something cool. I can see the structure to it. And
jackpot.
The excitement of it. So penguin poo. We'll just get those all chopped off the list right there. Yeah.
Poop, people.
Yeah.
Want to learn about poop? Here you go. So in Antarctica, penguin guano is incredibly important for me as a person who's looking at their populations from a very large scale, continent-wide populations. Their guano is what tells us that they are in a particular location, which is fantastic. So in the case of emperor penguins, they live only on the sea ice, and they leave a really nice guano stain that is brown when you're looking at it from the high resolution imagery. So that tells us that they're there, which is the first indication. And then we use some remote sensing techniques to kind of tease apart the pixels that are guano, snow, and then be able to tease apart the ones that are actually penguins. So that's how we come up with their population estimates. And then in the case of Adelie penguins, the other true Antarctic penguin species, they also live within their guano. They leave a really big, nice guano stain. And the size of the guano stain is correlated to the number of animals that is actually there at the same time. So in other words, the more guano, the bigger the population is. And so that gives us the ability to watch their populations through time and be able to see what causes their populations to go up and down at a very broad scale, rather than just looking at very population-wide or even just regional-wide trends.
Is that something very common with birds, where they'll just stay right there? If they don't walk off a little ways and come back? Like some, mammal species like raccoons, they'll always have that select little spot that they go to, not necessarily where they're living. Is that something that's very common with birds?
So, well, that's a good question. So, at least in penguins, at least with the Adelie penguins, they will come back to the same nest sometimes.
Okay.
A lot of times they'll come back to the same exact nest every year. And we think with emperor penguins, a lot of times they'll do that too. They'll come back to the same spots, but not necessarily. When times get tough, what we're finding now is that they'll actually move around a little bit. So the environment gets to be in a situation that's not very favorable. They can be a little bit more plastic in their behavior and move around. And we know that because we're able to watch the populations through time.
So, like, can you tell, just by, the marks in the snow there, that's how long that they've been there? Like, does it build up, is, the coloration different so you can tell, how long that particular colony has been there?
That's a great question. So there's two different types of guano that we look at. So you're right. So the guano for Adelie penguins will build up in there, and that's one of the things that's really important to pay attention to, is because if a population was really big and then shrinks, you need to be able to make sure that you can figure that out right. So the new guano is pinker. It's pinker than the older guano. I never would have imagined it being pink. Yeah, so it's pinker. So the older guano is this kind of light brownish beige color, and then the newly deposited stuff from this current season is really, really pink, and it's the really pink stuff that we are interested in being able to track their populations through time.
So with the satellite imagery that you're using, how does that work? Explain to folks out there who might not necessarily know how you use satellite imagery. How good a resolution do you get? Just kind of maybe walk us through the process.
Yeah, so the satellite imagery we use is what's called very high resolution. So that means it's spatial resolution, so the size of a pixel is like this now. In contrast, so that's about 30 centimeters. Some of the high resolution images are 60 centimeter resolution. In contrast, Landsat is 15 to 30 meter resolution. So this is hundreds of times finer detail. And so what that means is an animal like an emperor penguin will take up several pixels rather than being all within a single pixel. So that's how we can tell what we're looking at.
Nice. So do you use anything else besides satellite? Have you thought about doing something like a UAV or a drone? Is it possible where you're at? I'm thinking, you're down in these Arctic regions. How well do you think a drone will work down there?
So I've never used a drone myself. I think there's a lot of potential, for drones to be used in the Antarctic. The one thing that I'm, I guess not skeptical necessarily, but I'm concerned about is the fact that it's really windy. And so wind can definitely, if you wanted to even plan out a course and fly a drone, I feel like it would be very easily swept off course pretty easily, and I think the wind is just it's potentially a huge problem. So I know some people have used little quadricopters and things from ships and gone over. So I think it's a matter of just working on the technology to have yet another layer of kind of ground validation and looking at what we're seeing on the ground. Because a lot of these colonies, even if you wanted to get into them and count all the birds, you just couldn't. So you have to have some sort of aerial survey.
So do the aerial surveys, you find that helps you quantify those populations a little bit better versus visual sight? I know when I've gone out and done my mute swan surveys, if I have a large flock of 200 swans out there, it's hard. Even when you have 3 people on that boat counting, you're going to always come up with a different number. But you find that with having that imagery, does it make it easier to be a little bit more precise?
Personally, the more counts you can have from different sources, I think it is better just to have a different, several different ways of validating. Just because, like you said, if you're counting from the ground, your perspective is very different than it is in the air, which is also very different from the satellite imagery. So I feel like, for my purposes, I'm always interested in making sure that the satellite images are validated with whatever we can get from the ground. To try to kind of make that the gold standard of being able to monitor populations through time.
Do you think it's still maybe at the point where human, with the binoculars might still be better, because the resolution isn't quite there where you can pick out stuff?
We're always gonna. I think we'll always need some sort of ground validation, just because they're starting to do things now, or at least we're starting to learn about some of the behaviors that they have that we didn't know before. So it's going to be critical to continually validate what we think we're seeing on the imagery, because if I think I'm counting or coming up with an estimate of, say 1,000 birds at Cape Crozier of emperor penguins, I need to make sure that that's actually real, and so we just continually, I think, should have that ground validation. Yep.
So since you do a lot of work in the Antarctica and Arctic, what inspired you to do that? Some researchers like to stay around areas they know. What drove you to want to go work in the polar regions?
It was kind of just sheer luck that I got the job in Antarctica in the first place, making maps for the United States Antarctic program, just because I had GIS experience. So that was kind of luck. And then as I was doing some of this map making a few years into it, we got access to this high resolution imagery, and it was just kind of messing around with the imagery and exploring. I found that you can see seals and emperor penguins, and did a little bit of research and found that somebody else had done kind of a pilot study on emperor penguins, and that was when I realized that I wanted to do a PhD. And then after I did my emperor penguin work, I was approached by a colleague of mine at the University of Minnesota, Seth Stapleton, who does research on polar bears, and he asked me if I wanted to work with him on a polar bear project. So that's how I got to go to the other pole. I haven't been there yet, but that's how I have done work there.
Oh, okay, got you. So you've done some cougar work, and I know in Michigan it was kind of controversial for a while if there were cougars or not. It finally was, we were able to establish that they were there, but it's thought that a lot of the cougars are dispersing from those western populations. So what can you tell us a little bit of how cougars disperse across the U.S.?
Yeah, so my other work I do is on mountain lions, and what we're finding is, so when I did mountain lion work for my master's degree, and so that started in 2005, and as of 2005 there were like handfuls of confirmations each year. And so when I say a confirmation, that's really important because this is not a sighting. These are like verified pieces of physical evidence of an animal in a state that's not like in the West.
It's so not someone just on Facebook saying, hey, I think I saw something out there.
Yes, because otherwise, they would be all over the place if that were the case. So what we think is happening is that the West has basically become full, and there's effectively no more room at the end. So these subadult males are effectively being kicked out of the West, and they have to go somewhere, and the Midwest is this place where there aren't any mountain lions, and they're not going to get beat up because there aren't any mountain lions, and so they're moving east. And so that's what we're finding, is that a lot of these animals that end up as carcasses, unfortunately, are subadult males for the most part, and their genetic structure is very well related to a lot of the populations out west.
So mountain lions used to be in the eastern U.S.,
They did,
correct?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. So they were extirpated.
All right.
Yes.
So they're just. So do you think any of these coming back, or do you think they're going to be successful when they come back? With like the public perceptions of it, also maybe the genetics are slightly different from what the species, that was originally, well, it was all one species, but the original populations that were over here, do you think there might be some differences in behaviors that might not make them as successful? So
I think there's two questions. The first question is whether or not they'll make it, and the second one is whether or not people will allow it. Those are two different things. So I think, we've done some modeling work, and that suggests that mountain lions are likely to reestablish populations in the Midwest within the next 25 years. And this is female mountain lions, and the reason that's critical to mention is because female mountain lions don't move nearly as far or as often when they disperse as males do. So that's the reason we're seeing so many males in the Midwest, because they're the ones who tend to move. So females don't move as far or as often, and so despite that, we still think that they're likely to make it to places like Arkansas, Missouri. We're already seeing them reestablish in Nebraska. So I think that they can make it to these locations to start breeding populations, providing males also make it. Whether or not people will allow be receptive to these populations actually becoming reestablished is another question. It's worked so far in North Dakota and in Nebraska, but farther east I think is a really big unknown.
Do you think it's just their fear of having that large predator out there? Okay.
Yes. absolutely. And that's part of what we try to do at the Cougar Network. We don't do advocacy, but we do science communication and outreach and research. And that's one of the things that I feel very strongly about, is to provide accurate scientific information for people to make decisions. And the fact of the matter is, you're very unlikely to ever see one. Even if you had one in Missouri, I'm sure there are several in Missouri right now, actually, probably wandering around, and you probably will never see them or know that they're ever there.
Yeah, because they're a pretty cryptic species, correct?
Yeah, they're very elusive. They don't like people. They like to kind of hang out in the woods in rugged terrain. So
most places where people aren't going to be necessarily just going for their Sunday afternoon stroll.
Exactly. And they like deer, so they're not going to attack people for any good reason.
Well, speaking of science communication, you do an awesome Friday thing called Cougar or Not.
Thank you.
What inspired that? And because I know I'm thoroughly entertained. One of the coolest things with science communication that I had was actually guessing one of your Cougar or Nots.
It's fun, right?
Yeah. I was like, yes. Yeah. It's like, I guess Minnesota. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, exactly. I win. That's right. I know. I felt bad I didn't have enough to give away to everybody who got it right.
It was just the pride in actually guessing that it was Minnesota. Like, I had to be like, yes, I guess Minnesota. I was telling everyone.
It was me.
So I think it's a really awesome concept. So please tell us, like, how you came up with that, how you feel that it's worked. Do you think it's like been something that the public's been really receptive to? That it's like getting your goals across with, with the concepts?
Yeah, so so the first question about how I was inspired, I was actually inspired by Dr. David Steen, and who does Not a Copperhead, and I love that, and I'm like, this is fantastic. So I had seen him doing that for a little while, and then literally just one day I was sitting at my desk on a Friday afternoon in October, and I was realizing how many images, how many photos we get sent of mountain lions that are not actually mountain lions. And I thought that that would be a really good opportunity to talk about the fact that most of the photos we get are not mountain lions. And so I just really randomly just posted a picture on a Friday and asked people to identify it. And then I just decided to continue doing it because I like it. I think it's a lot of fun for me, and people seem to like it, and that's kind of fun. So whether or not it's making a difference, I'd like to hope so. I think that at least my Twitter followers, which is not a ton of people, with respect to the rest of the Midwest, now understand that if you see something that is a mountain lion, it's very, very unlikely to be a mountain lion. So I feel like I've made a difference in that respect. But whether or not it's actually making a difference across the rest of the Midwest, I have no idea. I'd like to think so. Maybe at some point it would, but...
What do people most misidentify as a mountain lion? A house cat, a bobcat?
Both of those things. Yep. Right. House cats and bobcats are surprisingly large, according to a lot of people.
But my sister's cat back when we were kids, it did get up to about 20 pounds, and it I swear when it was laying on my chest, I couldn't quite breathe right. But it's still not quite the same as a mountain lion.
And that's not to, and that's exactly right. Like I feel like a lot of people just don't understand how big they really are. Like they're huge animals. And so when you're
saying huge, like what weight class, like for people to feel like what's like average? 100-pound
animal would be like the size of a dispersing animal. They can get up to like 150 pounds. They're huge. They're huge.
Yeah. So has there ever been a 100-pound house cat out there?
And we're really not very good. Humanity is just really bad at guessing size. Mm-hmm. Just generally, so if I say a 100-pound animal, I feel like that's a really difficult thing, just generally speaking, to understand what a 100-pound animal actually looks like. And so I think that has a lot to do with the misperceptions. And sometimes when there are images that when you don't have depth perception, or if you don't have a tree in the way to help you guess how big that animal is, it gets to be really hard. So I can understand where they can be pretty tough. And I get stumped every once in a while too. So there was one, actually, the one that my favorite was a bobcat that was sent to us in Louisiana, and it was coming through the woods, and it was kind of in the shadows, and it was huge. It was huge. So I couldn't really tell if there were spots or if it was because of the shadows that was on it, and it was this really big animal, and its face was kind of in the shadows. So I couldn't exactly tell, and the first time I looked at it, I was like, oh, that is I think it's a bobcat, but I think it's a really big bobcat. So it's hard to do, is the point, to definitively say.
So how do you feel like science communication has benefited your career? Because one of the things, like, I love science communication, and I find that, like, the opportunities that I've been afforded just by being part of that science Twitter community have really helped me out. How do you feel like it's helped you out with your career?
So I've been invited to give talks because of my involvement on Twitter.
Same here.
Yeah, it's great. I meet people on Twitter, and there's actually been, I feel like I've been involved in some actual real collaborations because of it, because we're all out there kind of talking about what we do, and not in a boastful way. It's more along the lines of, hey, these are interesting things, and I'm really appreciative of that because I am also very interested in what other people are doing too. So to have a platform like Science Twitter to do that kind of communication, I think it's been really great for advancing the messages that I would like to advance and I want people to know. And it's also been really great to meet people and start new collaborations and be invited to give talks about things that I'm very passionate about. So I'm very happy for that opportunity.
All right. Yeah, like I noticed at the end of your talk, you had your Twitter handle up there. Do you find that people actually contact you via Twitter, like after seeing a talk like that? Do you find that that's been helpful?
Yeah, I think I do. I think people start following me, at least. A few people will start following me afterwards. And usually people will come up to me in person after the talk, but if they don't, then they'll be able to contact me afterwards. And I think that's happened probably a couple times.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I noticed earlier today when you were talking to another researcher here that you guys exchanged Twitter handles.
I know.
And it almost kind of felt like a new way of, we always used to have our business cards, but now I feel like Twitter is kind of becoming that new business card. Do you feel the same?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. I love Twitter for that reason. Seriously, because I'm on it every day, and if I want to see what somebody's been up to, having a business card doesn't help me, right? If I want to see what somebody's been doing in the last week, I can just go to and follow them on Twitter, which is really great. And because I think we're a society that's really connected now, it makes a lot more sense to have that ability to have constant connections, and Twitter allows for that.
Yeah, I kind of like to think of it as online CV that you're generating. You send a paper CV to someone and they see what it is that you've done, but with like that science communication through Twitter, maybe Facebook, other things like Instagram and stuff, you kind of get to see who that person is.
Right.
And do you like it for that, or are there other reasons that that you like to use it? Maybe things that I haven't even thought of.
Yeah. So I think. As far as the thing that I think Twitter allows us to do is not only be researchers, but it also allows our personalities to come through. And one of the things that I feel very strongly about, actually, as a scientist and also as kind of a de facto science communicator, is the fact that scientists are humans. Like we feel things. Like I care about penguins, actually, and I also think they're cute, and I think it's okay to admit that I think they're cute. And I care about animal welfare. I care about animal rights. Like these are things that we care about, and I think that having the ability to show your personality and the fact that you care about these things beyond just a scientific objective is really critical, because I think there's this perception of scientists that we're just these very like unfeeling robots that generate results all the time, and that's like the furthest thing from the truth. And so being able to do things like this on Periscope and on Twitter really allows me to at least get that out there for anyone who cares to listen.
Yeah, you can say that we're actually fun and engaging people. We're not just like these data points, with the old thought process of a scientist with their lab coat and just sitting behind the lab bench.
I haven't worn a lab coat since I did hoary bat crap.
Do you find that being able to network with other scientists on there helps? I mean, not just as far as talk opportunities, but also being able to discuss with other scientists some of the issues that you find, like you have issues with women in STEM, other things, of how we deal with that, and being able to bounce those ideas off other scientists. Do you feel that that's helped you at all?
Yeah, so actually, interestingly, the other day I went to Ann Hilborn's talk, the Cheetah Lady, and I didn't understand a couple things about her talk, and it was just not that she did a bad job, she did a fantastic job, and I was like, I need you to explain something to me, and I had a bunch of questions, and I asked them to her on Twitter, and she's like, hey, let's just meet, and we talked for like 2 hours, not solely about that, obviously, but it was great. It was like, I finally get to meet the famous cheetah woman, and it was wonderful, and she's obviously much more than just the famous cheetah woman. She's a brilliant scientist and a great communicator and just a wonderful person, but Twitter allowed us to do that, and I do think it's also really critical, because we did talk about being a woman in STEM, in STEM, just in general and in science. And so I think there's kind of this community of, like, you feel like you belong, kind of, which is kind of weird, because I grew up in, you know, in the 90s when there were like chat rooms and stuff, and it was like kind of a weird thing to like meet somebody from a chat room. So I feel like this is kind of like that in a nerdy way, but in a good way, like in a good way.
But I feel like you can trust like people because they know other scientists, so it's not like you're just meeting some random stranger. They know someone that you know, so you feel like there's already that ease when you're talking to someone. You can trust that's who it is you're talking to.
And you're like at a conference, so you're in a safe spot, and you can see, and you have the opportunity to willingly follow these people, and you can see what they're doing and see that your interests and theirs are, you know, aligned or at least similar in some way. So yeah, I think it's really cool. You can kind of know a little bit about this person before. So rather than just like cold meeting them, you can like kind of see what they're doing and have an informed discussion, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think it eases that transition, because if you first meet someone at a conference and you've never met them in your life, it's such an awkward, like, hi, how are you?
I know.
Can I talk to you? Kind of have that imposter syndrome possibly going on. And it's just that awkwardness. But I think by talking to someone ahead of time on Twitter, you already have that little comfortableness with them when you actually meet them, and so it's completely awkward, and you kind of, some of the people, like, I meet them, it's like, I've known you for so long on Twitter, I need a hug right now.
I know,
you know, it's not that like awkward, can I come talk to you? I'm interested in your work. So.
Well, you already have a leg up, right? Yeah. So, or you already have like rather than starting out at the ground, you're already up here. Like, okay, and now we have, like I said, it's an informed discussion rather than having all of that back talk of like, okay, where did you go to school and blah blah blah. That crap's already out of the way. I already know what you're studying. I know I want to talk to you. Here's the reasons I want to talk to you, and now we can have a discussion about those things rather than wasting time in the beginning. So I think it's cool. Yeah.
For all the scientists out there, because I've been trying to encourage, you know, everyone from undergrad all the way up to people well into their careers to get onto Twitter and start doing science communication. What advice would you have for people just starting out in science communication?
Follow on Twitter, anyway. Follow a lot of people. Follow people that you think are really interesting, because that's a really good way to, first of all, watch what they do and do what they do. Follow the people who do things the way that you would want to do them. So, for example, I follow people who are inspiring and kind, and that's something that I feel very strongly about as a scientist. I think it's really good to be trustworthy and kind when you're facing the public, because, like I said, I feel like there's whether it's a realistic perception or not, there's this perception that we're not humans. So I try to find people that are also like that, but also who are doing interesting, groundbreaking work. As far as science communication in general, the one thing that I would really recommend people do is listen.
Okay.
And the reason I say that, again, is it gets back to this notion that I feel like we are sometimes actually perceived quite accurately in some cases. Some people are really not very nice to people who disagree with them, or to people who just don't understand. And to somebody who just doesn't understand what you're talking about, to call them stupid, to call them a jerk, or to even be sarcastic in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable, would that make you want to listen to them in the future? Exactly. And so to resist the urge to be like, oh my gosh, you're an idiot, resist that and remind yourself what your actual goal is. And if your actual goal is to educate and to get people being interested in science, making people feel excluded in any way is not the way to do it.
Right. That's really good advice. Yeah, because I think sometimes we forget that, you know, we need to just sit there and just listen to what other people are saying, because they come from so many different backgrounds. And, you know, I remember there was a story in West Michigan about these two gals who were out on a tube going down the river, and for some reason they thought that the river would go around in a circle and drop them back off to where they were. But a lot of people were making fun of them, but the thing is, I don't think that they had ever been outside the city before. So, like, if you look at it from their perspective, if you've never been on a river before, you might not know that, and to make fun of them, you know, while it might seem like a really simple concept for those of us who go and do outdoor science all the time, to someone else who's never been out there, that's a whole brand new thing, and just to, like, go make fun of them, you just can't do that.
Well, and I just don't understand what making fun of people does anyway. It just makes you feel better, right? Like if I am making fun of you because I think you're stupid, that doesn't make anybody but me feel good, right? And so what's the point in that? Why not helpfully, not even necessarily correct, but like, oh, that's a good point, because maybe you've been on a lazy river before, and lazy rivers do go around in circles, but you know what, rivers have to flow into something, and so that's why they don't come back, or whatever. But there's no reason to be rude, and I just feel like I see that too much, and it bothers me.
No, it's a really good point to remember that we're all people, and we're all still learning, and
we're all in this together. We're all in this together, and why not be an advocate for, like, hey, guess what? If I want to do some research on something that I think is really interesting, say it's taxpayer funded, you're helping me do that. Why on earth would I disenfranchise you from the work that I'm doing when I think it's really cool? Why not make it really cool to you too? Because you have an investment in it.
Right. So when you're posting on Twitter, what kind of things do you post? So, because for people just starting out, they might not know, like, what should I post out there? I know everyone has their own personal style, but what's kind of your personal style with Twitter and what you post?
So my personal style, I tend to retweet things that I think, I do a lot of retweeting, first of all. I do a lot of retweeting, and I retweet things that I think are important, interesting, fascinating. I tend to retweet things that are educational too. So along those lines, and I tend to also retweet like Antarctic, polar, predator stuff. Every once in a while, I will tweet political things, and I tend not to do that too much, but the reason I do is because I agree with Dr. Katie Mack. We are humans, and we all have a say in this, at least in the United States, we have a say in the political process, and I think it's important to be informed and to have an opinion. So I try to keep that to a minimum, but for a new person starting out, what I would tweet about are things that interest you, because people will become interested in things that you're interested in, and so you have to get that out there. So it's a little bit of allowing yourself to be vulnerable too, because there's always that kind of that question, like maybe people won't like what I have to say, but you have to be okay with that, because not everyone's gonna like what you have to say, and so, but you will find people who do.
Yeah, like when I first started out on Twitter, I was posting just science stuff, thinking, okay, this was going to be my science space, and you know, I've learned over time to kind of let some of my personality shine through, and you know, sometimes, you know, I'll just talk about like random, like I post a lot about my niece and nephew up there, because I think that helps humanize me, and also helps inspire people to like help others learn about science, because you see the excitement in their eyes. And then I've even seen, you know, some scientists where they post about what TV show that they like. And it happened that one time a scientist, like I kind of knew a little bit on Twitter, but not very well, posted one of my favorite TV shows up there, and so I chatted back with her. Next thing we know, 3 months later, she's one of my best pals out there, all because she posted about some TV show. It had nothing to do with science at all, but it was just, you know, she was just thinking that at the time and put that out. So I think you can let some of your personality go through, and you never know. You might end up with a really good science buddy that, you know, can become a good advocate for you. You can bounce ideas off of. You know, we talk about not only SciComm, but other things like how we're dealing with grad school and stuff like that, all because of just this one random tweet that she put out there. Right.
And knowing that you exist is a good thing. Like, so if you're looking for a job and you're, you know, there's a committee that's looking for people, having like somebody go, oh, I've heard of them, at least on Twitter, that's better than nothing, right? Providing it's a good
good experience
for good reason, which is why I feel very strongly about being positive in your science communications. It's fine to be opinionated. So yeah, I'll let my opinions show through, but I tend to keep like super personal stuff up. So like I try not to mention my partner too much, just because he's not on Twitter and he can't defend himself. I want to tease him or something. So I try to not to do that. But other than that, I love to post things that I think people would be appropriately interested in.
So if you've got any questions for Michelle, go ahead and start sending those in. If not, we're probably going to start wrapping things up, because we've got a final night social that we got to go to. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of starting to get a little hungry.
Yes,
so
slightly.
Yeah, some good food would be good, and getting to go hang out with all of our colleagues here, because it's the last night, so it's the last time we're going to get to see some of them for a good year at least. So. But yeah, since I don't see any questions coming through right now, if you have any other questions, definitely feel free to tweet us. If you missed part of this Periscope, check it out on wildlifebiologal.com. I'll have the links up for Periscope, YouTube, and also the SoundCloud podcast later on. But yeah, for all of you who are interested in science communication, definitely follow Michelle. She's really big with her Cougar or Not and all the science communication. So all of you scientists who have been bugging during TWS to get on Twitter and start doing some SciComm,
do it.
Yes. So follow us along, and we'll see you guys later because we're gonna go get some
We're gonna
food.
go have barbecue now.
Yep. So, see ya. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.